But if you want these versions of these characters and you don't have any of them yet, I'd suggest saving out for the dramatic capture set. Just seems like it'll be more convenient. Yeah, I think I was right in saying that. The Dramatic Capture Series Cybertron Chase Pack is one that I was really looking forward to. For one thing, so I could finally get my hands on an Origins Jazz, but also because I was slightly iffy on the two molds that I already had from it. Because look, I really like Wheeljack, but I thought there was some things really holding it back, particularly the deco and hand feel, and Bumblebee I just didn't click with. I know this is a great figure in a lot of people's eyes, but it just wasn't quite for me. But history has proven to me that a change of deco can completely change how I feel about a mold, so has it improved in my eyes? Well, let's take a look at them and find out. And I think we'll start with Bumblebee because this is the figure that the pack was really riding on for me. Because yeah, as mentioned, I'm not a huge fan of the Origins B mold. There's something about the look of it that is just extremely off to me. I find there's a little bit of an intersect with the style of this guy. The upper half is really nice and consistent. It's quite a boxy, slim looking design. Yeah, there's a bit of kibble, but I don't particularly mind it. But then the bottom half takes a much more rounded approach, which I don't hate, but you put them together and just, it comes across a little uncanny. I didn't even mind all the kibble that he has. The big backpack and the ankle flaps kind of work into the design, and you can't really avoid them with how he's meant to transform, but the differing aesthetics across one mold, I just wasn't sold on it. But these colors do wonders to soften that. Bringing up the warmth of the yellow and replacing all the black with this kind of matte grey was a really good call, because it lowers the contrast just enough that it's not quite so jarring, and suddenly there seems like there is a lot more of a flow to this figure. Even the head sculpt, which I still don't particularly love, looks way better with this white shade. And another thing about that white shade, it's kind of helped with the quality across this guy. If you look pretty closely at some of the edges on the clear plastic portions, you can see that they have base coated them with that and then covered it in the yellow, which makes the color matching with the main plastic so much better. It's things like that that I really appreciate the DCS line for. It just makes this guy seem so much more consistent on the whole, and the good paint doesn't stop there. There isn't a whole lot of it on this guy, but what there is really nicely applied and really good shades. All that metallic blue on the chest is really lovely, and I genuinely can't tell where segments of the color match grey begin and end, like on the shins. Now don't get me wrong, this doesn't 100% save this figure visually for me. I still don't love the look of it, but this deco does just take it to a point where I quite like it. And that's enough for me, because the playability on this thing is really what holds it up, and that starts with the accessories. I didn't love the blaster on the original version. The black just really drowned out a lot of the detail, but it shines a lot better in this grey. So does that air bubble. Let me just... hang on, let me cut that off. Yeah, there we go. It's still far from my favourite Bumblebee blaster I've ever seen, but this works for what it is. And the jetpack is still kinda meh. It's very hollow and it doesn't work with a whole bunch of other figures that you would want to try putting it on just because of the placement of the port, but it looks pretty nice on the main figure and the sculpting is lovely. But these accessories wouldn't really be worth a damn unless he could strike a pose, but thankfully he can. It's probably the best thing he can do. Minus one pretty significant problem that I have with it. The head's on a pretty good but extremely tight ball joint. Genuinely, I have to get a really good grip on this thing just to turn it. There's some very tight butterfly joints. The shoulders can move out pretty standardly and go all the way around. There's bicep swivels, really good but very tight elbows. Nothing at the wrists. There's a waist swivel. The hips can kick out to the side on a really tight joint. Are you sensing a pattern here? They do feel alright going forward and back, but they are a little limited. There's pretty tight thigh swivels, decent knees, although you can untab a panel to get a double knee, and extending ankles which give you some really good forward, back, and tilt. Look, I am all for a very solid figure, but this might be a little too solid. It just takes a little bit too much hard work and effort to pose this thing, and it would be fine on a slightly larger figure, but this guy am small, and those joints are very tiny. And I do worry that the tightness on some of them, especially the hips, might cause them to break. I'm not sure about that, but I kinda get that feeling. I don't know, I might have to invest in some silicone grease for this guy. But you know, the actual over-tightness aside, he feels pretty good. The plastic's really nice and dense. I don't worry about the clear plastic on this guy cracking. He's got a decent amount of weight to him for a figure this small, and the motion is pretty nice and dynamic. Yeah, overall, in terms of robot mode, this is a clear improvement over the original. I'm not gonna lie to you and say that it's my favorite Bumblebee toy I've ever had, but it definitely has the best colors on a Bumblebee I've ever seen. And it definitely doesn't have the worst transformation either, but it ain't the best. Look, since my original video on the Origins figure, I have gotten a bit more attuned with how to do this without all the parts popping off it, but I still don't love this. I think it is clever. The parts reuse between modes, like the feet becoming the sides, is something I really appreciate, but it is still a little tricky to get all plugged together, and this version does not like to tab in at the back or at the front. Either or. So I suppose you just gotta pick which gap you'd prefer. But despite it not always tabbing together amazingly, I do think this alt mode is a massive improvement over the original. Just by virtue of the color matching being so much better. I mean, there were maybe 4 different yellows across that thing. This time, there's 1, arguably 2 if you count the panels on the back. They are ever so slightly different, although you can barely see it in person. And it does help me appreciate some of the things this alt mode does more than the original. I really like that the kibble on the bottom is giving it a little spacer so it looks like it's hovering off the ground. The overall shape of this mode is pretty nice and cartoon accurate. There's some really nice new surface detailing, and I particularly like the smoothness of the overall shape. And I do like that you can stick the accessories on there, like this big radio box on the top. Kinda adds into the whole scout vibe. And yeah, while this might not be my favorite alt mode in the world, I suppose it works. And I do really appreciate the changes that they've made to this figure overall. I like it a lot more than I used to. And while it might be the most notable improvement in my books, it's not my favorite figure in the set. That would have to go to Wheeljack, because I already like this mold, but this version has taken it to a whole other level. The look of this thing is f***ing phenomenal. Yes, he is pretty kibbly, maybe a little more so than Bumblebee, but I really don't mind that, just because of how chunky he is overall. This is a really boxy look for Wheeljack. All the limbs have been kind of puffed out a little bit, but they still retain a really squared off shape. And it helps the kibble blend in a little bit more. And while some of the features aren't quite so noticeably Wheeljack-ish, like the feet for instance, they're a bit more genericized, what is there, the chest and the head, on point. Never looked better. But that was really all the same with the original version. Where this really improves is in the deco, because while the actual color choices are much closer between the two, the paint just goes nuts. There's a couple little splashes of green on the shins which really help more than you'd expect. That was one of the points on the original figure where it just felt a little too plain. But the chest is really where the deco here stands out. The extra bits of white paint just to cover up the excess clear plastic do so much for the look, and it really highlights the window chest. So does the metallic blue coat that's been applied to it, that's really nice. And the really vibrant red stands out so much more. It's kind of the same case with the head. The matte grey does so much to highlight the life in the head sculpt in my opinion, and it really helps the bright blue eyes shine through. And crucially, the back wings in the grey plastic stand out so much more than the white ones on the old figure. This does an unbelievable amount for the look. I know it's so simple, but the extra little bits of paint that they've applied around the chest just bring it up so much more. I think this might actually be my favourite Dramatic Capture Series deco, right behind Blitzwing. I highly doubt anything's beating that anytime soon. But Wheeljack is a close second, and thankfully, he's also really fun in hand. He comes with his blaster. It is cast in clear plastic just like the original, but it feels pretty durable to me. And the coat of paint has thankfully this time been put on thick enough that you can't see straight through it. And while you could always plug this in his hand, come on, he ain't got that shoulder port for nothing. Yeah, that looks right. He also comes with these little gear looking doodads that are much more relevant in the alt mode. You can plug them on the back or on the end of the weapon though. There is of course the shield, which is once again more important than the alt mode. I do appreciate the silver paint on the inside of it though, that gives a really cool effect. And you can plug it on the back in this mode. And finally, you do have the Energon rods, all 6 of them. Hallelujah.
There's not enough energy in these conductors to last a Cortex.
He can finally say that now. These are cast in a really nice neon orange plastic, and they don't have the most integration with this set, but you can at least stick him on his back with the rest of the junk. The accessories are pretty good in the scope of the whole set, but in the robot mode there's not a lot that you can do with most of them. But that doesn't mean this guy is hard pressed for play value, because this guy poses pretty damn well. The head is on a pretty good ball joint, and the chest panel does love to come untabbed so you can get some further up and down movement. The shoulders creak out to the side pretty standardly. Jesus Christ, these are a little too tight. They can go all the way around. There's bicep swivels, standard elbows, wrist swivels, or waist swivel. The hips go out to the side alright and kick forward and back pretty well. There's thigh swivels, pretty good knees. There's a hinge at the ankles to position them forward and back, and then the ankle itself is on a ball joint, which gives you pretty much everything you'd need, including a decent pivot. Yeah, the posing here across the board is alright. The kibble doesn't really impact it too much, and the joints are all pretty nice feeling, except for the shoulders once again. Too tight. But overall, this feels so much nicer than the original. The backpack stays together much better, the hips are much more solid. That was a big problem that I had with the old one. And overall, it makes this guy not only a lot more dynamic, but way more fun to mess with. And that continues into the transformation, which I'm sure isn't going to be for everyone, but I quite enjoy it. I originally didn't like this conversion very much. I thought in concept it was really clever. The way the arms make up the front and then everything kind of turns and twists a little bit more than you'd expect, and all the panels and the legs legs unfurl to create this very intuitive process. I always appreciated that part. The thing that I didn't like was the fact that a lot of the tolerances were just slightly too loose, and it just kind of wriggled around in your hands and didn't want to line up. None of that is the case here. The overly tight shoulders do sometimes make it a little bit difficult to line up the front properly, but the rest of it, the tolerances are just right for it to hold its shape when you're putting it all together, so it's not a pain in the ass. And in the end, it leaves you with a pretty good alt mode. I'm not going to say that this is my favorite alt mode in all the Transformers, but there is something very appealing about this to me. It's just a big solid brick of a thing. I love the way that everything kind of tapers in a different direction, and for being so boxy, it's very dynamic looking. And look, it's not the most different from the original version in this mode, but those extra pops of metallic do really help. And I do really like the overall darker shade of clear plastic. The only thing I could maybe critique about it is the fact that it does rest on a couple of clear tabs, so maybe be gentle when you're setting this thing down. But of course, this doesn't just sit there and look pretty. There's a lot of functionality in this mode. You can open up the top and store some of the accessories in there if you really want to, or you can attach the shield and the rotors and get the armored mode from the show, which I think looks really cool. I wasn't originally a fan of the silver paint stopping you from seeing the figure underneath the shield, but I kind of appreciate the look of it more now. It creates a very dramatic look for this mode, and I'm into it. And I really appreciate the effect of the sculpting underneath it as well. But of course, the functionality doesn't stop there. You can plug the energon rods into the top at the back, or you can open up the back entirely and slip them in there, or why stop there? Fold up Bumblebee a little bit and stick him in the back. Look, it's not the most useful thing in the world, and you can only barely see Bumblebee through it, but it's still fun that you have the option to do that with these two. And for all he's worth, yeah, I really enjoyed this Wheeljack figure. In fact, it's probably my favorite Wheeljack figure I own. Jazz, on the other hand, might not be my favorite Jazz figure, but he does do some pretty interesting things. One of which is the look of the robot mode. I'm a big fan of the direction they took with this. It's given me a big Dreamwave vibe. I really like SS86 Jazz, but the proportions on that are a little wacky and wide. This guy is a really good mix of slender and bulky. The faux chest and shins have some really nice details across them. That chest is actually really reminiscent of the 86 one, Jesus. And they work really well as kind of the main features you've got here, even with that big cutout in the shins. I don't mind it. But the things that really stand out to me here are the details in between. The thighs, waist, and arms are just really proportionately great, and they have just the right amount of sculpting to balance between the much more detailed chest and much simpler shins. Also really appreciate that they just straight up took the head off the 86 figure. I'm like, why wouldn't you? That's perfect. Just sculpting wise, this guy's no slouch at all. Even with the kibble, I think he's probably the cleanest member of this group. The only place where he really lags behind it all is in the deco, because yeah, it's pretty nice, but it is a lot simpler than the rest of them. Now, I don't have the original Origins Jazz, but you can see from stock photos that there isn't much change with this guy. The whites and blacks are pretty much the same, it's just the shins and the chest which have some slightly different paint apps to them, which I do much prefer here. But I would at the very least have appreciated maybe the little blue lines on his crotch or something, just so there was a little bit of extra breakup. I don't know, that singular little square of blue and the red strip across his chest, they're just a little bit bland. However, a deco that slightly lags behind his packmates isn't going to put me off this thing, especially considering he is definitely the most photogenic in the pack. There's just something very dynamic to this mold, and I'm into it. Now, accessory-wise, he comes with his blaster. The sculpting on it's alright, and I actually do like the shape of it overall, but I do think I prefer the SS86 version. It's just a little bit more distinct, but it does at least look pretty good in his hands. What looks even better, though, is this grappling hook. Now, this is an accessory I really appreciate the inclusion of, no matter how simple it is. Would I have appreciated a big line on a reel like we got with Legacy Sandstorm? Yeah, definitely, but this is still alright. It's just the spool and the hook, and you can flip away the hand and tab it all together on the wrist. Does wonders for the look of him. Very dynamic and a nice inclusion, since we're doing single episode stuff. However, the accessories overall I don't think are quite as good as Wheeljack's. But the posing is about on par. The head is on a very mobile ball joint with a lot of wiggle room. There's some very shallow butterfly joints, the shoulders can move out pretty standardly and go all the way around. There's bicep swivels, decent elbows, nothing at the wrists. Waist swivel. The hips are a little limited going out to the side unless you move the backpack out of the way, but they can go forward and back pretty far. There's thigh swivels, decent knees, maybe a little restricted. The toes can point down, and there's good ankle pivots. While the articulation on this guy might not stand out particularly much, especially compared to B, there is a lot here that he's doing right. A lot of the dynamicism of the sculpt really helps the poses stand out, and he is the most evenly good feeling figure of the lot, just in terms of the joints. However, not in terms of the backpack unfortunately, because it doesn't tab in and has the only goddamn loose joint in the entire f***ing figure. Oh, this is annoying. It's not really deal-breaking in my books. A lot of the time when you're handling a figure like this, you're going to be holding onto the chest and the backpack anyway. And it's not so loose that it flops down all the time, but sometimes it will just drop down. Fortunately, it is a solid plastic joint rather than a clear one that is loose, so I'll be able to go in there and tighten it, but still wish I didn't have to, you know? But overall, it doesn't detract too much from my enjoyment of this figure. I still really enjoy its robot mode. And the transformation is pretty good too, up to a point. The majority of this conversion is pretty quick and simple. It's very Datsun-esque. It's quite satisfying to open up the legs and flip out the extra panel, compress them down. Using the arms to lock the legs into place is pretty simple, and getting the front third of the alt mode clipped in is pretty satisfying. But clipping in the clear roof and windshield section shits me up so bad because you have to put so much pressure on it, and I'm just so worried that it's gonna snap. I mean, the clear plastic is pretty robust, but I just don't know enough about it. Does the Origins Jazz mold break? Let me know in the comments. But yeah, the alt mode is probably the best of the three. Maybe, debatably. Look, the other two are partial shell formers, this is a full shell former. Every single piece of this alt mode on display is specifically for this alt mode. So it comes together with a very neat and consistent aesthetic that is very reminiscent of the cartoon. But there are a couple of little tiny issues with it that I have, not big ones, just a couple of the panel lines don't quite line up how I'd want them to, just so you have enough give for the transformation, and it does kind of break up the vibe a bit. But that only seems an issue for me when I'm looking at it up close, and from a little bit of a distance or with the others, it looks really good. You know, it can't do very much, none of these have wheels obviously. You just get a little bit of accessory storage for the hook underneath. But the best thing that this thing has going for it is the look. I just really appreciate how sleek it is up to a point until you get that massive wing on the back. It's a fun vibe. And that's really how I describe this set as a whole, because unlike some of the other dramatic capture packs that we've had, I don't really get the pristine collectible vibe just as much. Maybe the closest to that is Wheeljack, he is lovely, but the other two, they just feel so fun factor focused, rather than looking good on a shelf. And this might be one of the most worthwhile packs to come out of this entire subline so far as well. I mean, we've had a couple of packs that refer to specific episodes or groups of characters, but this one is one scene, and it is molds that are catered to be that one scene, in decos, which I adore. That and the fact that it is the only way at the moment to get all three of these molds in one place, I'd say especially for the price, it is well worth it. To a collector that just wants some Cybertronian versions of these characters, or wants these three figures as a whole, this is definitely going to be your best bet. Look, I don't think this is quite as good as the previous Triple Takeover pack, but it is damn close behind it. And if you agree, then please leave a like. And if not, then leave a comment, tell me what you think about this set. And be sure to subscribe for the next one. We've got something kinda special coming up. It is the 2-year anniversary of my channel and video 100. Nuts. But if you're really interested in seeing what that is early, then my Patreon is always an option to you, where you get early access, you name in the credits, photo galleries, the whole works. It's always an option. Right now though, I think I'm gonna go and make an apple crumble because I'm craving it. And we do have apples. Lots of apples. So many apples. Anyway, ciao.